What's up, friends? It's an episode of Folk Cited. It's me, Daisy, the one who likes to talk about mushrooms and stuff, and I'm joined by Shirley Shields. Shirley, announce yourself. Moss on a Rock says lichen supremacy. I love moss and frogs and mushrooms. Well, you are in luck. I hope you also like slugs. I've got some very cute slugs here.
Hell yeah.
They're very good. Shirley, I'm gonna get you on screen because you're
cool.
decorated in mushrooms.
I mushroomed out, baby.
You mushroomed out, baby.
Baby.
Baby. Okay, folks. Hey, it's another episode of Folk Cited. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there's a bunch of people watching with us. Hey, I have a ton of fun stuff to say tonight. Shirley has a ton of fun stuff to say tonight. I think we're really excited. Raw milk is still going strong. That's very good. Death Lorist, I think. I don't know. Maybe after tonight we'll do a shrooms one based on all of the ridiculousness that Shirley and I have been saying backstage, which has been, frankly, stream of consciousness kind of wild. So you are in for a ride.
This has wine in it, and I don't drink that often.
Well, yeah. So Shirley has a glass of wine. I have a beer, of course, because yeast, obviously. So we'll talk about that as we get to the end of the book, probably, as we get to our kind of, I don't know, favorite parts and aspects of this book. But welcome to the show. This is Folk Cited. This is the book/text club. We're kind of trying to expand our notions of text as how that relates to folklore in a club kind of version. This month, the month of May, we asked /set up /whatever promoted for you all to read this book called Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which is kind of a pop science book on mushrooms and how they are entangled in the everyday aspects of our life, how they've influenced science, where they kind of stand today. The book came out in 2020. It's kind of a new book. It's been really fun to read. We're going to get into it today. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. This is our first Folk Cited episode of the summer. So if you haven't already, check out our Instagram. I will just go ahead and Folkwise that for you, Nightbot. Thank you very much. Usually you're the worst, but today you're the best, Nightbot.
Please pray us. As is your nature.
As is your nature. Yeah, if you haven't followed us on Instagram, we posted our summer schedule. So once a month we run this show. Usually it's on the third Thursday. I understand this is the fourth Thursday. It's a weird month. Weird jump start to this. So check out what we have coming down the pipeline for the summer. But again, Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake is an awesome book that Shirley and I read together. We're going to talk about all the things that it made us think about from our folklore brains, which exist in very different spectrums of the world of folklore, yet also similar at the same time. I don't know. We're like twins, but not. We look very similar, and our brains are like approaching the thing from different fields, but it's all on the same subject. So I don't.
One of us tells only lies, and the other only truth.
Exactly. Which one is which? You have to guess by the end of the show. I'm speaking too early about Nightbot. Oh. I don't know. Yeah, Nightbot might try to hate crime us tonight. I say that because Nightbot doesn't like when we say gay, and we're talking a lot about queer stuff, so I don't think that the entity itself is trying to do that, but wrong stream, wrong kind of people, you know. Anyway. It's because we're both Dom's children. Yeah, maybe that's also, probably.
We have been on chat together for too long, I think, because we're already deep in the sillies.
We're going off the rails. I wanted to do one or two other check-ins before we just dive right into the book and what the rest of the night's gonna be. So number one is we hit a sub goal, like last week, I think, officially, and that means that our very own Shirley is going to be wearing Renaissance Fair garb during our next Tuesday Folkwise live stream. So if you want to see Shirley wearing that garb, I believe that's next Tuesday.
Yeah, I'll send a missive to my good friend Ann Prentice, and
yes, please.
They'll be on stream next week.
Ann Prentice will be with us, perhaps, so that'll be really cool. And then on Saturday this week, so not tomorrow, but the next day, I'm going to be streaming an episode of what we're going to start calling Mixtape, which is kind of a variety show, folklore, We look at lots of different things like music, cooking, crafting, sometimes video games, sometimes just kind of out-of-the-box ideas, discussions. I am going to be playing Calico and talking about cat folklore. That's what I hope to be doing. So if you want to hang out on Saturday, extremely chill. I'm going to start at noon Eastern time on Saturday, jump into my playthrough of Calico, talk about cats and cat folklore because I feel like we've been waiting for this. That is also going to be a subathon and the subathon is not to extend my playtime, but rather will extend the minutes that Shirley has to read the entire script of the B movie to complete the film. So the more you sub, the more bits you send, the more subscriptions you add, the time will increase on the clock of the film so that Shirley has to read whatever that, like, minute amount translates to.
Yeah, we'll figure out the exact formula before the stream. And if we reach the end, I'll just loop back around. It'll be great.
Yeah, and this is an idea that came out of our copy pasta Folk Cited episode, which is our most recent one before this one today, where we talked about copy pastas, creepypastas, and we recorded some of them ourselves, and Shirley decided to record like 15 minutes of just straight up reading the B movie script. So we really want Shirley to finish it.
Because that pasta just to cut and paste the entirety of the B movie script just randomly like that. Like it was relevant.
It was relevant there. It was relevant there, folks. Okay. Great. So let's get into it. So today I thought it would be helpful for us to start off by talking about just the nature of mycology and folklore and why we chose this book and what we thought would be cool about it. I wrote something up a little bit because I find that I get my ideas better down on paper to avoid dream brain. Dream brain is for later, people. Okay, let me just write this thing down because I feel like I have a good idea. Oh my god, hi Dom. Yeah, it's the Princelings here.
Oh, my father.
What is up, father, brother, uncle, whatever. All of the relations. Sup? Hey, aren't you supposed to be in a forest? Pretty sure you're supposed to be in a forest. Wait till you see the Anne Prentice surprise. Yeah, it's gonna be really good. Dear. Okay, so mycology, for those who do not know, is the study of fungi, which includes mushrooms and yeasts. It's a field most notably carried out in the hard sciences and biological fields, but it's also branched out into more of an interdisciplinary fields, and collaborations, including like grassroots and community movements, who all work together with fungi to help us better understand their influence on our collective worlds. So it's not something that's just limited to biology. A lot of different people are doing lots of different kinds of experiments, like in their home, in their gardens, with people in activist circles, with folklorists, with lots of different kinds of people. Holy shit, Dom! Whoa! Thank you for all of those subs. Wow. Hachimachi. Thank you, right off the bat. I'm personally interested in mycology as a folklorist because of the interdisciplinary and emergent scholarship that comes out of mycological exploration. It informs us not only about the significance of sociability to the movement and progression of life on Earth, but also how these interconnected relationships between fungi and other subjects are longer, like geologically speaking, and can also help us think differently about our relationships to the planet and other human and non-human organisms that we interact with every single day. So it's an obvious pairing to me because of the values of emergence, the pairing being folklore and mycology, because of these values of emergence and community collaboration that help guide the pursuit of knowledge. So it's kind of recontextualizing where the location of knowledge sits for us. From all disciplines of all angles, the science of fungi has been shaped by these kinds of emergent and community collaborative strategies, as much as folklore and humanities scholarship has been shaped by human communities. Oh my gosh, Luomi, thank you. Death Loris, thank you. I'm hearing a cheers coming in through my ears. Thank you so much. I think collaboration between these kind of visionary fields, folklore and mycology, is an ideal fit for deepening our understanding of the formation and sustenance of our everyday relationships and subsequent formation of knowledges that does not, one, center humans, And 2, actively works against dominant and traditionally harmful individualistic pursuits of knowledge that undergird most Western institutions. So rather than saying knowledge comes from one or a comparison of one and the other, it is like recentering and reconfiguring how we are influenced collaboratively through our relationships to form knowledge through our interactions with other people, centering the interaction as opposed to the individual's interpretation of that interaction. I think it's fucking cool. Shirley, what do you like about mushrooms? What do you think about them in relation to folklore? What can you tell the people?
Man, I just think they're neat little dudes.
They're just neat little dudes.
They're just neat little guys, my friend. Yeah, I mean, I guess. How do I put this? I guess in a way, part of my fondness for mushrooms and fungi in general started to grow, using them sort of as a representative of the process of decay, which I think is and well, like, and really their place in the decomposition cycle, and how our attitudes towards death and that kind of change is affected, like, by our, like, I mean, that's a folkloric thing, our general attitudes towards death and that change, that transition from life to death, and mushrooms as the physical representation of that process, in a sense, that as sort of, because you get decomposers in, like, carrion birds and stuff like that, and other carrion species, but I feel like mushrooms tend to be primarily defined by their role in the decomposition cycle. And I just find that cycle and how we think about that cycle and just the metaphoric aspects of that cycle, and not even just in the literal death of things, but also mushrooms and decomposition and decay in connection with grief, and loss in general, even outside of physical death, but any sort of loss is a kind of grief and is a kind of death, and how they kind of represent that process to us in a way we can understand a little bit easier than when we think about it on a more cosmic scale.
I love the fucking death posting happening right now in the chat. Death posting is happening, people. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think so. It's interesting. Like, there's like this. The thing I'm interested in is this kind of, like, broad, like, relational, like, community element, and then you're interested in the process. So, like, what is the thing that the mushrooms do to connect or to communicate? It's almost like the folklorist who's interested in the shape of community, and the folklorist who's interested in the transmission of the knowledge. Like, all of that. I don't know how to explain. I mean, we're both interested in the same thing, but I like that we're bringing together these, like, elements of, like, what do the mushrooms do, and kind of, like, how we can represent the, like, larger scale.
Mushrooms are almost very liminal, based on our human understanding of the world.
Because they're neither plant.
Liminal space. Yeah.
They're their own category of being. They're neither plant nor animal.
They're liminal in the sense that they defy all of our current definitions of everything, and they're also very liminal in how they act upon literally transforming things from one form into another.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's sort of, a physicality of the liminal, which has always been a thing I've enjoyed. Yeah.
So this is why we've brought you this text today. We thought this was a good guide for, like, an overview of talking about mushrooms completely. You can't really see my full thing there. There you go. And we will get to kind of a discussion of the book, or kind of using the book to facilitate other kinds of discussions, like a text club kind of would. And specifically, I wanted to like tackle or like build on what Shirley was just mentioning about decomposition, because it's something I've also been really personally interested in. Shirley, how, when you're talking about decomposition and the process of mushrooms and like why they're important to folklore, everything you just were saying, like, in what ways do you see decomposition unfolding in the kinds of stuff that you are encountering in your everyday life?
In my everyday life,
I want you to talk about I want you to talk about zombies.
Okay. Well, funnily enough, this idea of decay and transitionary life, I guess, really also dovetails very well with my other interest is in zombies. So much, supplemental texts. I have this fun little book.
Tell us about this. What is this?
This is Zombies: A Cultural History by Roger Luckhurst. It is a cool, awesome book. I guess it's a little bit more anthropological leaning. I feel like a lot of zombie studies tend to be anthropologically leaning rather than folklorically leaning. At least the current research being done, but the disciplines have a lot of overlap anyway. There's also a lot more study, and I guess in a sense, a lot more of what I've focused on is zombies in the popular culture and how that reflects on societal attitudes and ideas. And there's, because like zombies have occupied various parts of culture and society. The initial idea of the American idea of zombies, because like most cultures have some form of the undead, and really talking about the inherent fallibilities of human taxonomy, really when you're talking about the undead, they tend to be categorized as either vampire or zombie, and like there are some distinctions. Like usually vampires tend to have drained some sort of life force, and zombies tend to be a little bit more visceral and physical.
It almost sounds like a distinction between like agency and lack thereof or something.
Yeah, but like there is like Nordic zombies, they're like still sapient. They're just sort of like base boosted ghosts almost.
Okay.
But like if you compare like someone who actually knows how to properly pronounce Chinese, please correct me. But I will do my best.
Where's new guy? New guy, are you here?
the Zongji, mm-hmm. the Chinese vampires, they, reading the descriptions, they sound more like what one would what would automatically associate with zombies, like the idea that they are a physical, still somewhat rotting body that is animated by some other force. But because they're key draining, they tend to get categorized as vampires. And vampires are more popular, and we're just, it's the Chinese vampire. Like, there's a little bit of that. But there is an argument to be made of them being categorized into zombies, and there, like, a lot of the distinction almost seems to come down to the fact of visible decay of the body. Some vampire traditions and, pardon me, designs can go a little bit more monstrous and altered. Like the Nosferatu movie is a little bit more physically distinct. Still humanoid, but still not human looking anymore. But zombies tend to be very much, they are still moving, but they are still distinctly a rotting corpse. Yes.
I'm thinking about, you make me think about a couple things. One is, I'm not a big fan of zombies, but I do have a favorite zombie, and those are the ones that are in Last of Us video game series, which are
Which are mushroom zombies.
which are mushroom zombies. Like, they, instead of, I mean, they could bite you and infect you, but also it's about their spores. Like, it's about the spores that that the zombies kind of release that transmit to you, which I find really fascinating in relation to decay. I don't know, what's your, like, hot take of that? And then I have another kind of larger point.
Not personally played The Last of Us, either one of them. I have a friend who has, and so that's where I get most of my knowledge from. That and the internet discourse that happened when the second one came out. I read some of that. I find it, I mean, it's definitely interesting as a concept, and it's cool. And also, focusing on, like, the idea of the spores infecting and that aspect of a zombie transmission, almost, I watched, also kind of reminds me of how zombies work in The Walking Dead, where the idea is whatever the infection is, I guess it's assumed airborne, but the idea is that everyone is already infected, and it's just when you die, then you become a zombie, no matter how you die, whether or not you get bitten or not. So that's almost, one could say, it's probably more biologically virusy, but that's still, that sense of invisible dispersal reminds me of that too. I think it's a neat concept, and I think it is, the decay aspect was already there, and they just made them cool looking.
Fairy Tellers asks, who I think the entire chat and us, if we've read the Mexican Gothic. I have not.
Like, as a genre, or is it a specific?
No. Have any of you read Mexican Gothic? I haven't. Death Florist apparently has. The whole time you're thinking about the whole time you're reading Entangled Life. Yeah. Well, I gotta check it out then, I guess. I haven't read it. Oh, thank you, Death Florist, for the link. Shirley, you're, like, talking about decay and decomposition of the body and how that works in tandem with these kinds of bacteria and yeasts and mycelium, which is like the underground part of the mushroom, for those who don't know. So, like, the mushroom is the fruiting body. It's like if you take an apple tree, the apple is the mushroom and the tree is the mycelium. Basically, it's all happening underground. You just don't see it. It's always there, whether or not there's a fruiting body on it. I think a lot about decomposition in relation to, like, metaphor, and in particular how we transition through different stages of community projects as a public folklorist. And there will be a video dropping either on Patreon or YouTube of a presentation that I did recently about this, so I'm not going to go and repeat that. It will come out. You can hear about that kind of actual, like, scholarship that I'm writing right now. But the question that it begs for me, I mean, and to use... sorry for the, like, binary nature of the English language, but the decomposition begs the question, what is composed that is then being decomposed? And when you think about zombies, I am always wondering, what is the composition that the decomposition of the body, of the I don't know, human sentiment, of the consciousness, whatever, of capitalism, whatever is being decomposed is, like, what was composed in the first place that we're trying to work against.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What do you have to say to this kind of question of the dichotomy between composition and decomposition, which is kind of in the last chapter of Entangled Life too? They talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, like,
I should say the epilogue. It's in the epilogue. Yeah. They talk about that.
Still using the zombie as an example, almost. It is, I guess the easiest thing to identify is the fear of death that is innate in pretty much every human culture, as far as I know, at least. And so there is something that is, like, instinctually disquieting about the dead body still animated, in a sense. And so there's that. And then the idea of what the zombie is, especially, once again, focusing on the American idea of the zombie, how the zombies are created and especially tends to speak to various fears and anxieties on a cultural level in general. So the American idea of the zombie comes from Haitian tradition. It's part of it's rooted in this idea of I think it's been since debunked on a scientific level, but like something about pufferfish toxin. But there in some Haitian cultures there is this idea of you can enchant someone to become basically a mindless, a slave really, to do your bidding. And then a lot of that got carried over in the slave trade, where it was, an unfortunately apt metaphor for a large portion of a large portion of people. And so there's this idea of yourself being taken over, and that fear of being out of control of oneself, and how you not being able to choose, your will being overridden, even if your body is physically alive, is a form of death. And then, so there was, I think the movie White Zombie kind of focuses on this version of zombies a bit more. And then the first instance of, in a more familiar form of the modern zombie, is the Night of the Living Dead, which is very much a metaphor for the Red Scare. It all goes back to the Red Scare, my dudes. And the fear of communism on, Western American capitalistic society. And this idea of a slow-moving but unstoppable and unified force kind of consuming you. And, this idea of mindless, faceless, just kind of working single-mindedly for one thing, that kind of this destruction of individuality.
The word
is also,
go ahead.
Well, it's also more slightly over the years, because for a while, then the go-to zombie explanation was the zombie outbreak. This idea of a plague, a contagion infecting people, and this societal destruction on that level. My theory is we're not going to see a lot of that in the next coming years, because we have hit.
It's a little too close.
We have seen this. I mean, because like people were talking like years before coronavirus came out. What there was people talking about, the cycles of these things, and like, how outbreaks like this tend to happen, and how we were due for one, and what validity there is to that is debatable, I suppose. I'm not the person to talk to about that, but I feel like there was, even if one didn't acknowledge it, there was still a subconscious societal fear of there is some sort of outbreak that we cannot control that had the potential to destroy life as we know it. And to make the people, our loved ones, into something that we can no longer recognize.
You made me think about like a bunch of different things. Can I add to some statements that you said?
Sure, yeah. Just kind of going off.
I mean, so when you're talking about like Haitian zombieism and this, and then also we're kind of talking about this quote unquote innate fear of death. Like, I wonder if this innate fear of death is more of a Western / like, I don't know, Enlightenment kind of thinking than I know of. It pushes me in this direction because I'm thinking a lot, to bring us back to folklorists. Zora Neale Hurston has this like amazing, I don't know, cosmological, metaphysical kind of like philosophy about the nature of the body, and this relates to biopolitics, which, for those of you who don't know, biopolitics is kind of like the idea that the ultimate kind of control or dominion of power that the state operates with as an entity is the biological, the like physical, organic body. and that the state basically gets to determine through that kind of power who has access to life and death. And usually that relates over to the policing of bodies. We can talk about that a lot of different ways. There's other expanded theories like necropolitics, which is literally like the politics of life and death and who has the power to determine who gets to live and die, things like that. So biopolitics is kind of like the policing and management and state-run institutional jurisdiction over like whether or not you have rights to your own like biological inhabited space, the body. I mean, I got questions about what is a body that we could talk about later, but Zora Neale Hurston has this kind of a couple amazing points that she makes about like, because so many people are denied control over their body, that one way to operate in a world in which you have no control over your own life or death or physical like presence on Earth is to understand it through kind of a concept of decomposition or of transformation of the organic matter into one that is ever present and is constantly redistributed into new nutrient kinds of forms. So, for example, if you die, your body decays, you become then part of the soil that feeds your family in the future. Those kinds of deep cyclical senses of how our existence on Earth has nothing to do with our own particular individual lifespan, but rather a kind of collective consciousness or collective movement of nutritional content to continue the movement of our life and care together that we take with us. And like she even extends this all the way into like the stars and like beyond Earth kinds of organic matters. And I find that so compelling and interesting from a folklorist perspective in how we treat and interact with death in our everyday life, because it is not individualistic. It's about having like giving up the control over the body, and in many people's cases out of necessity, unfortunately, or out of the power. We do not have the power that we think we have. The state has the power that over our bodies in many ways, and so her version of coping with that is to just like give up the body to Earth, to ecology, to our like collective and ecosystem, which I find so compelling, because then what is the composition? Like, is the composition what we share with each other? Is it how we relate to each other? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I have questions about like this kind of anxiety about death. I'm not sure that everybody experiences it the same way.
Yeah.
And how does that influence our relationship to mushrooms? Yeah. I'm not sure. We're getting a little bit off of mushrooms, but yeah, I think though that the other kinds of organisms that interact with our bodies every day are so much more powerful than we give credit to. And one thing that Entangled Life, like the term entangled and entanglement is not only something that Merlin Sheldrake uses, but is also something that Anna Singh uses, who wrote this like wonderful book that it's gonna be a little bit bright. It's called Mushroom at the End of the World. Good title. Yeah, The Possibility of Life in the Capitalist Ruins. This is a great book. I have read it like 3 times, and I bought a physical copy of it because it was like one of those books that you just like buy the physical version of because you like it so much. This is a great book. It's all about it's a kind of multi-scaled like exploration into the world of the matsutake mushroom, which exists purely because of disturbance in global capitalism and also small scale like local farmers. It's very fascinating. This is a great book. It's on our list. But Anna Singh uses this concept of entanglement to kind of describe the nuance of relationships that occur in all of these different kinds of economies surrounding mushrooms and fungus, in particular matsutake mushrooms, but it can be expanded to lots of different areas as well. So Entangled Life was really compelling to me because it did a thing that I think folklorists can learn from, which is bringing together all of these different little relational points in a way that not only informs those relationships to a greater depth or has a more nuanced kind of look at all of those relationships, but also like does it's in a way that is just written so beautifully. Like, it's written in a way that is fun and engaging and for a popular audience, which I don't think folklorists write enough to, personally. Sometimes I think many academics get stuck in academic writing rather than taking some liberties with like metaphor and the way that we talk about these subjects to ways that are just like really difficult to understand. So I think that Entangled Life is a really good example of getting some of that nuance across in lots of different areas that obviously are just opening doors to questions is the goal of the book, right? Like, it's not going to answer all of them. It's supposed to get you to think differently about how you are relating to yourself, to others, to the world outside of your own existence, to a world that might be centered on something that has nothing to do with humans and rather centering other kinds of beings, in this case fungus, and the way that that has influenced and shaped human development in many ways. I know I'm kind of like rambling here, but I find that the ways that some like I don't know, mycologists or like scholars of mycelium. I know there's so many ways that we can talk about them, but people who study mushrooms do a really good job at describing the web, the network, the entangled relationships that fungus has, not only to the ecosystem at large or our natural world, but also to how people fit into that puzzle as well, like human beings fit into that puzzle as well. And I think that that's what folklorists want to do, but we're like on the edge of that. I think because of our focus on all of the different influences and nuances that we experience in everyday life and how we come to know from the self, from our relationships between different people, that sometimes it gets lost. Sometimes I feel like we're trying to do this and we're really close. So more folklore should read mushroom books, because I think that they do a really good job of describing those kinds of multi-layered relationships that are just like really compelling. I'm kind of rambling again, but Shirley, cut me off.
No, I mean, hey, no, you're right. Hell, I was rambling earlier. Yeah, I mean, to your point, it is a very well written book. I mean, I took a few creative nonfiction classes.
As a creative writer, what can you tell us about the?
Yeah, some of the degree and the sort of thing. Yeah, like I think you seem to be making a. Perhaps this is just me projecting, but you seem to. You keep referring to it as a pop science book. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think it's also very accurate.
There's a lot of nuance.
Yeah, like there's.
I keep saying that word.
I mean, when you're writing, you have to consider. I mean, good writing at least takes its audience into consideration, and a book intended to. A pop science book is going to be very differently written than a scientific journal article.
Yeah.
Because the audience is going to be very different, and I think the language used in this book is it's a lot more flowery than one would expect from a science book. But I also think it fits with this sort of romantic, capital R romantic idea of mushrooms and mycelium and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just even reading the introduction, I was immediately struck. Like, the prologue opens up with like a sort of in media res description of, you know, just kind of how mushrooms work, and it and you know the personal narrative anecdotes interspersed with, you know, his research, and like he also describes the processes through which he has done like more hard science sort of research and stuff like that. But that's not what this book is about. Also,
right.
So I think it's a very interesting balance. Like, you can kind of tell that there is more hard science behind it, but this is a way of that idea of when you fall in love with your work, and it makes it a little bit more palatable to audiences who don't know all of the Latin names for all the different genera and species and all that jazz.
You're picking up actually on a really great point about something that I've noticed in the mycology community at large, which is a total, like, blanket sense of idealism in a lot of ways. A lot of these texts are very hopeful for a future and a now that exists in relationship with mushrooms, fungus of all different kinds, as either ways that are going to improve society and the way that we relate to each other, in ways that hard sciences are going to, like, solve climate change with mushrooms, things like that. Like, it's very, like, big picture, very, like, if we do this now, all our problems will be solved, is sometimes what the rhetoric feels like. Even in Radical Mycology, this is another book, I'm just gonna, like, nobody saw my slug fall. It's fine. It's fine. Excuse me, little slug. Yeah, our continue reading list. This book is referenced at the end. It's in the last chapter of Entangled Life. It's called Radical Mycology. It's a thick-ass book. This is like a 500-page book. It is everything from exactly as as Merlin Sheldrake pointed out, in the sense that it's a kind of treatise on the ways that grassroots organizations and other kinds of home brewing folklore passed down from people who grow mushrooms have used that knowledge to advance science, hard sciences around fungus. So this book includes those kind of experiments, that kind of, manifesto, as well as how to ID mushrooms, how to grow them yourself, how to use them in lots of different, how to mushroom dye clothes, anything that you can think of that you personally might want to have a hand in relationship with fungus in your everyday life is in this book. I didn't have this book for a really long time because it was out of print, and then recently, like in the last year or two, it just became in print again for a lower price than it was. I could only find it online for like over $100, and I think I got this copy for like $50, maybe $60. But it's a thick ass book. It's got all kinds of pictures and information in it. It is so cool. Radical Mycology by Peter McCoy. This is one of those books that really changed the way that I thought about relationships and ecology, and how that I was already thinking so much about the relationships that people form to create human communities, and this only added to my depth of what that possibility could look like if we were thinking with mushrooms. So this is a really cool book. I forget where I was going with this, but it is like kind of an idealistic book, in the sense that if we just tell enough people how cool mushrooms are, it will solve our ecological crisis, which I think does a disservice in the sense that some people who are interested in mycology and cultivating mushrooms, using kind of mushroom technology, as it were, to work against some of the more harmful, like plastics or other kinds of factory productions, focusing on grassroots movements, focusing on everyday life, focusing on teaching people how to forage responsibly for mushrooms. Things like that are all great, and yet also are not enough to fight capitalism, or at least are like explicitly enough confronting the kind of global economy that is really the thing that's tanking the environment. So I find it is this kind of strange mix of, I like a lot of the philosophies, and a lot of them also do not quite acknowledge the full extent of like irreparable damage that capitalism and extractive economies have done to the environment. And unfortunately, in some ways, like in the end of Entangled Life, talking about these things like this mushroom leather. I don't know if anybody else has seen this come up in like BuzzFeed articles or whatever, like new mushroom fabrics. Fascinating science. But again, is that gonna like replace leather? Like, what's the end goal? How, are we just making another project or product, of capitalism that is just going to feed back into this system? Like, what is the end goal of it? I love the possibility and the potential, but again, you have to make it with extremely expensive equipment. You have to have extremely specialized, inaccessible knowledge to do things like that. So I tend to personally connect more when there's a realistic element that is almost, I don't want to say like defeatist, but like maybe a little bit, or even like existential, but something that is focusing much more on the everyday experiences of people and what we can do in our own lives to make meaning. Because if you begin to think like mushrooms can change the world, you are idealistic and kind of missing the point, I think. You're missing something larger about the scales of harm that happen here. Which is also why Anna Tsing's Mushroom at the End of the World is a great book, because I think it points out some of those like impossible conversations about the scale of global economies relating in this one instance to a particular economy, but that translates to many different ones where you need the disturbance, you need every piece of that puzzle to sustain the system, but also work against it. I don't know. I'm going off the rails again, but so that is one of my criticisms that you actually pointed out, I think, really well, in the nature of the type of writing, the rhetoric that the authors of these books are using when they write about mushrooms as being this like absolutely romantic view, which scares me as a folklorist for lots of reasons. I don't want any romantic nationalists in the chat. Please leave if that is you. I don't care if you like Henry Glassy or not. You don't need to be here if you stand Glassy.
Yeah, I mean, romantic nationalism is definitely a thing. I mean, Gothic romanticism is another thing. As a writer, I love to be a good metaphor.
I mean, that's my whole thing about decomposition, is thinking with metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually that got me thinking. When you talk about how, like, Entangled Life and these other texts you've mentioned have you thinking about, like, grassroots communities, are you thinking about them more as, like, mushrooms as a metaphor for how these things work, or mushrooms and the mycelium network as a blueprint for how these things should work?
So when I am talking about, in this recent kind of, I don't know if it's going to be like an article or a chapter of my dissertation or whatever, but this recent idea I've had about the end or transition of the end of a community project, and its relationship to decomposition, I'm thinking of, at first I was thinking of decomposition as a metaphor, and then I thought about it more. I'm like, I'm not actually sure that it is a metaphor. I think decomposition, the process of decomposition, the movement of this organic matter that gets broken down into smaller pieces of organic matter, smaller molecular nutrients that then get redistributed into soil to produce newer, different types of nutrients for plants. Like, for example, if decomposition didn't happen, trees may never form the ability to create fruits, because they need lots of different kinds of complex nutrients in this soil that they can pull from to be able to generate new and emergent kinds of life. So at first I was like, that is a metaphor, and then I think I've decided maybe it's not a metaphor. Maybe that's actually what's happening with community collaborations that go from a point of generation. They have a goal, producing the goal. We've either reached the goal, we were unable to reach the goal, whatever the reason is. Then now that community has to then separate back into little disparate parts, and they take with them not only the knowledge from the community that they, or from the collaboration that they just experienced with these new actors, whatever, relating to each other, but also the affect of the experience of collaboration into future projects, into their home life. They're developing all different kinds of skills, blah, blah, blah. I have a more nuanced reading of that'll come out soon. But, in terms of mushrooms, I think I name decomposers in that article as a metaphor. So I think the process is literal, but the different and maybe the different decomposers have different names, maybe of the cycle, but the actors, like, I don't think a human is a singular mushroom, but then again, maybe we have to think about, like, what does it mean to have, what is an individual? And are our bodies not also communities of bacteria, yeast, collaborations that are making our synapses happen in our brain that end up actually being more nuanced? We eat the food that feeds the nutrients that then make our brain make noises.
Yeah.
Same. I'm going off the rails, but like I have a lot of like really deep questions about whether or not, as a folklorist, I experience my body as an individual or as a community. Like, am I taking care of a community by taking care of my gut biome? Like, probably. And I think that we need to talk about that. We need to decenter the individual, like, human perspective into one that is more collaborative and centered on the relational aspect of the different types of bodies and experiences that we have that take place both within our body and then the bodies that we come in contact with.
Yeah.
This is where Dream Brain activates, okay?
God, but like, it's also correct. it's definitely, like, I mean, you could almost, like, you're talking about, like, specifically, like, grassroots and community projects and stuff like that, and, like, you could almost map out the idea of, like, a mycelium web to folklore, like narrative folklore, and like how a tradition or a fairy tale has changed throughout a culture, the different points where it kind of becomes something else, and how it melds with another to serve a different purpose, and how it adapts to its new environment. And you could, I mean, there's also something, I feel a lot of something slightly tangential to the zombie thing, but, you know, when you talk about death, it's hard to not talk about religion and spirituality, and I feel like specifically, like, reading this, and from what it sounds like, all of the other, like, mushroom mycology books you've been reading as well, it's almost like the mycologists are almost very open about how science and religion can occupy the same space and serve almost the same purposes.
Absolutely.
On a, like, theological level, I guess, really. Like, I mean, there's a difference between religious faith and the scientific method, but a surprising amount of science is based on faith of some kind.
I guess to add to that really quick before we go to break, I think that you are correct, and maybe what is being picked up on is this kind of notion of emergence and openness to the possibility of that connection, where I feel like other sciences are very much more strict about the types of data and the types and the form in which that data is discovered and things like this, where a gear towards mushrooms or experimentation with mycology is part of this kind of ideology of opportunity and emergence and potential that folklorists, I think, want to also be interested in, or at least today want to be interested in, and that leads to idealism and also new modes of thinking about the world and new discoveries. So what gets canonized is one thing, and then what becomes possible expands when you look at mushrooms and folklore, especially together, but also how mycologists are thinking about things too. I think we should address one or two of these chat questions. And Toon Chaos, just so you know, the questions that you emailed to me earlier, I put on our list. So we will get to them, if not right this second. But I wanted to say, Death Loris asked if we think that Clifford Geertz liked mushrooms. This is the person who sort of described famously ethnography as a practice of thick description. You're writing a lot about the context, all of the little details. I don't think Geertz understood mushrooms well enough to like them. Do I think he probably ate them and enjoyed them? Yes. Do I think that he's thinking about mushrooms in the ways that we are? Maybe not. Thinking about the webs of significance. I think if somebody laid out this mycological mycelial map to Geertz, maybe. But I think he probably is in the camp of, like, many old school academics and theorists who say that, like, humans are above all other species and yada yada, enlightenment, whatever. Toon Chaos wants to know, one, Shirley, if you've seen Discovery. This is very important for later.
I have seen a lot of Star Trek. I have not seen Discovery specifically, but I know what you're asking.
We will come back to that.
I know what you're leading towards, and I know what you talked about in the emailed question. I know what you're talking about, and
At one point, the Catholic Church was the largest funder of the sciences in the world, says Toon Chaos. Is that true? I had no idea.
I mean, the definition of what was and wasn't science has changed over the years.
I mean, is that what you...
Astrology was considered a hard science in the Elizabethan era.
Yeah.
So what is and isn't science, will vary. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's not that out... I mean, the church I went to growing up, we had a VBS based on, talking about science and how a lot of religiously minded people will consider science as just, the method in which God created the universe. Like, yes, it's all the science-y doobly-doo, but, God's the one that set it all in motion kind of stuff. I mean, it's not... A lot of people treat science and religion as, like, two opposing forces, when really they are incredibly interlinked.
Yes.
Both in the status they hold in, at least modern human society, and also in the ideas and how we use them to understand the world around us and what value we place upon it. The reason I've been looking at this book is because there was a quote about how... I don't remember if it was specifically about in the lichen chapter or if it was before that, but the idea of, like, there's something about fungi and fungal relationships that inherently breaks our understanding of how the world works and forces us to look at things in new ways. And there's definitely a note in here somewhere about the failings of human taxonomy, which I mentioned earlier. Objects that involve touch have a special emotional. Quotes have had meaning on many levels. Making quotes helped me to get a sense of my own space, sense of finding my way, sense of really working my way out of the labyrinth.